Welcome, everyone. My name is Turiya Gray, and I am the Chief People Officer at the Financial Health Network. I am pleased to have joining me today Michael Lennartz, Senior Vice President of Total Rewards for Mastercard, who will be having a conversation about how HR leaders can design financial health initiatives to drive more equitable financial health outcomes for employees. Welcome, Michael. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Turiya. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So this past year, I think we all recognize that it really highlighted some deep inequities that exist amongst workers in our society in many areas such as race, ethnicity, gender, and income. And those inequities, which existed way before the pandemic, have only gotten worse. So while many HR leaders have already been thinking about financial health as a part of their overall employee well-being strategies, it's important now more than ever to make sure that those efforts include an explicit focus on promoting greater equity. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about some of the efforts at Mastercard that you all have taken in this regard. So let's start off with pay equity. Mastercard has been a leader in providing pay transparency and were recently recognized last year as one of only 3 companies who met some pretty high standards around disclosure of both racial and gender pay gaps. So can you tell us a little bit about Mastercard's journey towards pay equity and how it connects to your company's overall DEI strategy?
Sure, my pleasure. Yeah, I think pay equity is a great place to start because you can't really have an honest discussion about financial health and inclusion if you don't start with its primary driver, which is pay equity. You've got to pay people equitably, and if you're not, you're almost certainly contributing to financially inequitable outcomes on the back end. So it's a great place to start, and what I can tell you about Mastercard's journey is that it started a few years ago when pay equity was becoming a really hot topic. And when we looked at it, we said, this is kind of a no-brainer for us, right? This aligns perfectly with our culture of decency, which is actually a phrase that was coined by our former CEO and our current executive chairman, Ajay Banga. And it's a sort of a credo that we live by every day. And we realized that we couldn't, with a straight face, talk to our employees about a culture of decency if we couldn't say that we were paying them equitably. So we absolutely had to do that. We realized it was a moral imperative, but more than that, we also realized that it was a strategic imperative. So this mattered to a lot of really important stakeholders. It mattered to our current employees at the time and our current employees now. It matters to prospective employees, people who might eventually join Mastercard. It mattered to our customers, to consumers, to merchants, to our partners. Basically, all of the important stakeholders in the payments ecosystem really had a stake in this. And most importantly, it mattered to our stockholders. And you see that trend now where increasingly big investors are focusing on companies that prioritize sustainability and what they call ESG, environmental, social, and governance initiatives. And DEI is a huge pillar within that sustainability framework. So it's really important. And we did our first global equity pay study in 2018. You can read about our studies in our sustainability report. The most recent one was actually published last summer. It covered the 2019 fiscal year. And if you read that report, what you'll see is that we disclosed that we pay women $1 for every $1 that her male counterpart earns, right? It's equal pay for equal work. That's what pay equity is. And while we are pleased with that result, we don't think that it's a particularly strong reason to vigorously celebrate. And the reason is pay equity doesn't tell the whole story. It controls for a lot of variables like the role that the person is in, the level that they're in, performance, their experience, et cetera. And essentially the bottom line is it's saying that if you take 2 people who are identical in every respect, except one is a woman and one is a man, or one is a Caucasian and the other is a person of color, you're saying that you pay those 2 people the same. And when you think about that, it's kind of amazing that that's not always the case. Yeah. Right? It's sort of unconscionable that it was ever a different outcome. So we think that the pay equity standard is a pretty low bar. You have to start maybe at that point, but we've gotten to a point now where we feel like we need a different metric, and that metric is the global median pay gap, which we disclosed for the first time last year, beginning of 2020, and that doesn't neutralize for any of those variables that the pay equity studies do. So all it's really doing is it's taking all of the females in your organization and rank ordering them on the basis of their pay, and then picking that middle data point, the median, and then doing the same for all of your male employees on a global basis, and just comparing those two median values. And when you do it that way, what you see is that at Mastercard, women make 92.2 cents for every dollar that men make by that standard. People of color make 93 cents for every dollar that Caucasians make. So when you don't neutralize for all of those variables, you're really getting to the heart of the inequality issue with respect to pay, which is representation. Right? The reason those numbers are not dollar for dollar is because men and Caucasians are disproportionately represented at more higher paying levels within the organization.
So based on those findings, are there some commitments that Mastercard has made since last summer to close that gap, or anything else you want to share about your learnings there?
Yeah, absolutely. So you may have seen an article recently in Bloomberg. It may have been in other news periodicals as well. It was authored by our CEO, that we have revised our executive incentive plan, our annual bonus plan, to include what we're calling an ESG, environmental, social, and governance modifier. One piece of that modifier is actually the global median gender pay gap. And we are committing to improving that. And if we don't improve it, executives will feel that in their bonus.
Okay. So how has Mastercard's commitment to equity influenced your strategy and approach in other aspects of benefits and total rewards aside from compensation?
Yeah, I would say that the pay equity experience and the pay gap experience themselves didn't really contribute to the way we think about things outside of pay in terms of benefits and total reward policies. I would say that what really has driven that effort is the culture. Like I said before, it's the same thing that drove the decisions to make those pay disclosures are the things that define how we think about benefits and making them inclusive. So, when we think about total rewards outside of compensation, we certainly focus on equality. And in the design process, we're asking questions like, whom might we be excluding by defining a policy a certain way? Or if we look at the existing benefits portfolio we've got, what might not be working here? What might be inadvertently excluding people that we have never thought about before? Right, and the classic example is a traditional maternity leave policy, where a birthing mother gets paid leave, but there's no benefit for for a father or for adoptive parents. It's very traditional. It's not very inclusive, and that's not we don't think that's right. So we've changed those policies. And by the way, and I don't mean to continue to harp on pay equity, but if you think about that traditional maternity leave policy and about what impact that has on pay equity, it has probably played some role in why men and women aren't paid equally in the workplace, because those traditional policies have resulted in oftentimes, mothers taking time off for their paid leave and then extending it on an unpaid basis because the father doesn't get any sort of parental leave, and he doesn't share any of that burden. So, perhaps after having multiple children, the working mother is back in the workplace, and she has found that her pay has suffered, or that some of the people who used to be peers are no longer peers; they've advanced. So these things are very interconnected. So what I was saying was, as a result of sort of asking that question of whom might we be excluding, we have designed very inclusive family building benefits. They include, equal time off, 16 weeks, full pay for adoption and childbirth. That's for everyone in all geographies where we operate all over the world. It's regardless of gender and sexual orientation. We also provide fertility and gestational surrogacy benefits that are inclusive of same-sex couples. So, those are pretty progressive ideas that a lot of companies don't have. We have benefit offerings that focus on disabilities as well. So, hearing aid benefits, all the way from, hearing aid benefits to things like paying for ABA therapy for children who have an autism spectrum disorder.
Okay. In our few minutes left, I think I've got one or two more questions. One is, once you've got some of those benefits in place, how is Mastercard thinking about kind of uptake and utilization from an equity perspective across different employee populations? So for example, I'm aware of a pretty generous 401k match that Mastercard offers up to 10% of base pay. And given kind of what is a well-known racial wealth gap across the country and the opportunity to support kind of longer-term financial security, what kind of strategies have you all put in place to promote kind of like retirement readiness or long-term savings for diverse employee populations?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned it's what we call the Investing in You plan. In the U.S., It's the 401k plan, but it works the same way in every geography where we have employees. And it's a very generous plan, as you mentioned. If an employee contributes 6% of their salary, we give them 10% in a contribution to the plan. So, it's 16% between the two sources of contributions. And I think the way in which we rolled that out was very helpful in, creating sort of an inclusive perspective around it, because we very strongly emphasized communications and education in that rollout. So it was making people aware, not of just how rich the benefit was, but how important retirement savings are to your future. And we've also built other features into the program that you might regard them as being a little bit paternalistic in so far as we're kind of protecting our employees from themselves, but it actually helps quite a bit in avoiding any exclusivity in the program. And those features are things like auto enrollment. So when you join Mastercard, you really have no choice in terms of enrolling in the plan. You are automatically enrolled. That way you get the full benefit of the match. The only way to not enroll is by proactively opting out, right? So, and it's very unlikely that anyone ever does that. We also have an auto escalation feature. So your contribution automatically goes up by 1% per year, again, unless you opt out. So these features are really helpful in ensuring participation across everyone, regardless of who they are or sort of where they are in their careers and their lives. And when we look at participation rates, 98% of our employees participate in the plan, so only 2% have opted out. But one of the things that we've done to ensure that the program is inclusive is we have analyzed that data, those 2% that have opted out, and we've concluded that there is no overrepresentation of a particular group versus the general population and people who have opted out. Similarly, we look at loan data. So people sometimes take out loans against their retirement plans. It's not a good thing to do, generally not financially advisable, but under certain circumstances, it happens and it needs to be done. And when we look at that data, we similarly find that there is no overrepresentation of diverse groups among the population that is taking out loans.
Okay. I know we're short on time, but in our last, maybe let's say 30 seconds or so, what is the one piece of advice that you would give to our fellow HR colleagues as they think about how to build more equity-based pay and benefits strategies?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know that I have a great answer for it, but what I can tell you from the Mastercard perspective is that what we've done is really have focused on the culture of the organization, and this culture of decency, this concept of being a force for good. If you can establish that culture and it's got the support of leadership, it makes everything else so much easier, because then some of these decisions around DEI really become no-brainers, because they align with the culture so well. And even more than that, if you can create alignment between sort of your internal culture and what the business is trying to achieve externally, that's even better. So at Mastercard, we want to be a force for good in the world. That's why we emphasize financial inclusion externally, bringing people into the digital economy who don't participate in it now. It's our In Solidarity plan, which you may have read about, which is, we've made huge commitments to the Black community in various metropolitan areas in the U.S., $500 million in investments over the next 5 years, all in the name of financial inclusion. If you can focus on sort of those business things like that, those external priorities, and draw a parallel with what you're doing internally and the DEI space, it makes it hugely powerful. So, again, just to continue the example within Solidarity, we, in addition to making the external commitment of $500 million to Black communities, we have committed to increasing representation at our vice president level by 50% over the next 5 years. So a 50% increase in Black representation at that level. It's a significant commitment, and it's a good example of how to draw the connection between what you're trying to achieve externally in the world from a business perspective and what you're trying to do internally.
Thank you for that, Michael. I've certainly found this conversation super insightful, and I'm sure all of our viewers have as well. So thanks again for taking the time to share your thoughts with us and all of the great work that you guys are doing at Mastercard. I'm going to encourage our audience to stay tuned for our next session entitled FinHealth on Main Street, Small Business Workplace Innovation, where you'll hear how small businesses are creating financial health for their employees and designing financial health programs for their workers in the small business environment. So I'll turn it over to that session momentarily. Thanks again, Michael. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Turiya. You too.